In Chicago's relentless downpour, a kind-hearted black waitress Lila Thompson risks her job, rushing into sheets of rain to rescue a frail elderly stranger slipping helplessly on the slick sidewalk. Steadying his trembling cane, shielding him under the cafe awning while drenched to her skin, her warm smile cutting through the storm like pure sunlight. The next morning, her heartless manager unleashes fury for her tardiness, threatening to shatter her fragile dreams, until that helpless old man returns as Farid al-Mansuri, mighty Arab billionaire CEO, his wise eyes and commanding voice flipping cruel injustice into a heartfelt miracle of protection and reward. Beloved elders, remember those timeless moments when one selfless deed of compassion summons extraordinary justice? In that glowing cafe amid steaming coffee and tearful gratitude, Lila's quiet courage proves true power kneels to golden hearts, changing lives forever, just as small kindnesses shaped our own cherished journeys through the years. It begins on a gray, rain-soaked morning in downtown Chicago, the city streets slick with water, umbrellas bobbing in every direction, and the smell of wet asphalt mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Lila Thompson, a young black waitress struggling to survive, spotted an elderly man slipping on the soaked sidewalk, cane in hand, coat soaked through. Without hesitation, she dashed into the rain, soaking herself in the process, and steadied him beneath the cafe awning. "Let me help you," she said softly, her voice steady, her movements calm but decisive. The old man's eyes, sharp yet kind, met hers with a flicker of surprise and gratitude. What Lila didn't know was that this man was Farid al-Mansuri, Arabbillionaire CEO visiting the city incognito, observing the world not just with wealth and power, but with an eye for character, integrity, and human decency. The next day, Lila returned to work, exhausted but proud, only to face her manager, who berated her for being late, despite the reason being her noble act of kindness. The unfair treatment left her worried she might lose her job, her livelihood hanging by a thread. But Farid, who had witnessed her courage and compassion from afar, decided that no act of moral integrity should go unrewarded. In that sunlit, rain-cleared cafe, the stage was set. Arrogance and authority were about to be confronted by the ethical force of a billionaire who understood that true power is measured not in fortune, but in the courage to uphold dignity, protect the vulnerable, and reward righteousness. And so, Lila's small act of kindness was about to turn into a moment that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, the city streets glistened with the remnants of last night's rain, sunlight reflecting off puddles like liquid gold, illuminating the busy sidewalks and the hurried faces of commuters. Inside the small downtown cafe, Lila Thompson moved between tables, her back straight, tray in hand, but her heart heavy. She had done nothing wrong, yet the shadow of yesterday's incident, being late from break to help an elderly man, loomed over her like a storm cloud she could not escape. Her manager, a stern woman named Vanessa Crowley, had already singled her out, her voice sharp and merciless. "Lila, if you can't follow rules, maybe this isn't the place for you." The words stung, cutting through Lila's resolve like a blade. Sweat beaded on her forehead, though it wasn't the heat, it was the anxiety of potentially losing her only source of income. She forced a smile, nodded, and tried to focus on the customers. Each polite thank you and have a great day, a fragile lifeline in a world that seemed ready to punish kindness. Outside, Farid al-Mansuri, the Arab billionaire who had observed her courage in the rain, was already moving toward the cafe. Even under the ordinary guise of an elderly man, his presence radiated authority, wealth, and an air of decisiveness that made people step aside almost unconsciously. Farid had witnessed not only her act of kindness but the integrity and dignity with which she carried herself every day. Wealth had always taught him to judge people quickly, based on performance, compliance, and appearances. But Lila's courage in helping someone vulnerable had revealed a depth of character rare even among the powerful circles he inhabited. As he entered the cafe, the chatter softened slightly, the staff sensing that something extraordinary had arrived in their midst. Farid walked directly to Vanessa, his presence commanding without arrogance, eyes sharp yet calm, a man used to wielding billions yet aware that today, influence would take a moral form rather than a financial one. "Good morning," he said, voice resonant, deliberate, carrying authority that was impossible to ignore. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding one of your employees." Vanessa looked up, startled, her posture stiffening as she recognized the power in his aura, though she had no idea who he truly was. "And who are you two?" she began, but he cut her off with a small, deliberate smile. "I witnessed her conduct yesterday. An act of compassion, courage, and integrity. That employee should be commended, not reprimanded." Lila froze, her eyes wide as she recognized the man who had been the elderly stranger in the rain, now standing in the middle of her workplace, radiating calm authority. Farid's gaze met hers, not with pity, but with admiration, acknowledgement, and a promise that justice would be done. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, struggling for words, suddenly aware that this was no ordinary customer, no trivial complaint. This was a force of influence, a man whose wealth and reputation could overshadow the cafe's management entirely. "She will continue her position," Farid continued, his voice unwavering, each syllable heavy with moral clarity. "And let this serve as a lesson. Character is not measured by compliance alone, but by courage, kindness, and dignity in the face of hardship. Those qualities deserve recognition, protection, and respect." Lila, standing in the background, felt a wave of relief, gratitude, and astonishment all at once. The fear she had carried, the anxiety of losing her job, melted in the warmth of moral justice finally arriving in the form of a billionaire who understood that power is most meaningful when it serves humanity, not ego. Outside, the sunlight glinted off puddles and buildings alike, illuminating a world that had just witnessed the quiet intersection of wealth, morality, and courage. And within the walls of that small cafe, a young waitress learned that even the smallest acts of kindness, carried out with integrity, could summon extraordinary protection, guidance, and recognition from those with the power, and the wisdom, to uphold what is right. Farid, observing quietly, understood that influence was not just currency, it was responsibility, and today he had exercised it fully, shaping not only a job but a lesson in dignity that would echo far beyond the cafe walls. The sun climbed higher over the city, scattering light across wet streets and rooftops, turning every puddle into a mirror of the world above. Inside the cafe, Lila Thompson moved with a cautious confidence, tray in hand, her posture still carrying the tension of the previous day but softened by the reassurance that Farid al-Mansouri, the Arab billionaire who had witnessed her act of kindness, had stepped in to protect her. The staff whispered in quiet awe, some stealing glances at the imposing man whose presence had transformed a mundane workplace into a stage of moral authority. Farid, now seated at a corner table, observed her as she interacted with customers, noting the meticulous care, the quiet patience, and the natural warmth that radiated from someone who had spent years facing hardship with dignity. He had seen power wielded in boardrooms, in contracts worth billions, but this everyday courage, was rarer than anything money could buy. Lila, unaware that the man she had helped in the rain was now watching her every move with quiet approval, continued her work, pouring coffee, taking orders, and navigating the relentless pace of a busy morning. Her mind, however, was not entirely at ease. Though her job had been saved, the memory of the manager's sharp words, the fear of losing her livelihood, still lingered. Farid's gaze met hers across the cafe, and a subtle acknowledgement passed between them. He had recognized her integrity, and she had begun to recognize the extraordinary power of someone who used wealth not to intimidate, but to protect and uphold justice. As the morning progressed, a ripple effect began to unfold. Patrons who had witnessed Farid's intervention whispered among themselves, spreading stories of the Arab billionaire who had stood up for a young waitress, turning what could have been a humiliating setback into a moment of triumph. The staff, too, began to behave differently, treating Lila with newfound respect, their own behavior influenced by the presence of moral authority paired with wealth and decisiveness. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, oblivious to the small yet profound transformations occurring in a sunlit cafe. Farid remained vigilant, observing not just Lila, but the environment she navigated daily, noting the subtle injustices, the small acts of courage, and the human dignity that demanded protection. By midday, Lila's confidence had returned, strengthened not only by the knowledge that her job was secure but also by the awareness that her actions mattered, that compassion, even in small gestures, could intersect with power to create justice. Farid, rising finally to leave, approached her table and spoke softly, yet deliberately, "You showed courage and integrity yesterday. Today, You've reminded me that power is most meaningful when it protects those who act rightly, regardless of their position in life. Never forget that the smallest acts of kindness can ripple far beyond what we see. Lila nodded, words catching in her throat, heart swelling with gratitude and awe, realizing that she had witnessed firsthand a rare form of wealth, one that was measured not in dollars, but in moral courage, influence, and the commitment to doing what is right. The sunlight framed them, casting long reflections across the polished cafe floor, as both teacher and student, billionaire and waitress, understood that justice and compassion, when combined, could reshape lives and leave impressions far more enduring than any fortune. The afternoon sunlight poured through the tall cafe windows, cutting sharp lines across polished tables and the faces of patrons who were slowly becoming aware of the story unfolding before them. Lila Thompson moved with calm efficiency, though her mind raced with the memory of Farid al-Mansouri's intervention. The Arab billionaire had not only saved her job but had done so with a quiet authority that commanded attention without raising his voice, reminding everyone present that true power was measured not by wealth or title, but by courage, insight, and ethical action. Around the cafe, the staff whispered, glancing nervously at Vanessa, their manager, who now seemed uncertain and defensive, realizing that authority wielded without morality could be undermined, even by the smallest act of kindness. Farid, seated at a corner table, observed the subtle changes, smiles exchanged among staff, whispered admiration, and the careful respect now given to Lila's every movement. He had seen boardrooms filled with people afraid of his authority, but here, he saw something more important, influence that inspired rather than intimidated. As he rose, the murmurs of patrons and staff followed him like an invisible chorus, attuned to the gravity of the moment. "Lila," he said quietly, standing beside her, "your actions yesterday remind me why power must always be guided by judgment and humanity. Do not let fear of authority or position ever silence you. Integrity must be your constant companion." Lila's eyes glistened with unshed tears, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and the dawning recognition that her life could change simply because someone with power had chosen to act with wisdom and ethics. Outside, the streets reflected the afternoon sun, and the city seemed to pause for a heartbeat, as though acknowledging that within a small cafe, a lesson in dignity, courage, and moral authority had been taught. Farid's presence remained subtle yet undeniable, a living reminder to everyone that even wealth and influence must serve humanity, that kindness is never wasted, and that small, courageous acts can trigger consequences far beyond one's imagination. Vanessa, now subdued, approached cautiously, her tone softened by the knowledge that she had witnessed true authority and the ethical use of power. "I understand," she murmured, though the words were insufficient to express the lesson she had absorbed. Farid merely nodded, his eyes returning to Lila with quiet affirmation. The ripple effects of justice, humility, and ethical leadership were now evident. Respect flowed organically, dignity was restored, and the cafe, once a stage for minor conflicts, had become a crucible for the demonstration of human morality at its finest. Lila, feeling the weight of the day lift, continued her work with renewed purpose, knowing that courage and compassion had not only saved her job but had earned her the respect of a man whose wealth and power spanned continents, yet whose greatest strength lay in choosing to protect the vulnerable and uphold truth above all else. The sunlight reflected across polished floors and glinting cups, a reminder that even in the most ordinary of places, extraordinary moral lessons can unfold when courage meets integrity, and when power is guided by ethics rather than ego. The late afternoon sun spilled across the city streets, reflecting off rain-slicked asphalt and the glass facades of office buildings, creating streaks of gold that seemed to follow Lila Thompson as she moved through the cafe. She felt different now, stronger, steadier, and aware that her life had shifted in ways she could barely articulate. Farid al-Mansouri, the Arab billionaire who had witnessed her courage in the rain and intervened to save her job, had left an indelible impression not only on her but on the entire cafe. Staff whispered quietly to one another, admiration mingled with surprise, recognizing that integrity and kindness could command the attention and respect of someone whose influence spanned continents. As Lila moved from table to table, the sense of relief and empowerment stayed with her. Each order she took, each smile she offered, carried a newfound confidence born of justice restored and dignity preserved. Farid, observing quietly from a distance before leaving the cafe, reflected on the moment. In his world of vast wealth, power, and high-stakes business, he had seen countless displays of obedience, flattery, and fear. But courage grounded in kindness, especially from someone with nothing but a strong heart and moral fiber, was rare and priceless. The ripple effect of his intervention began to expand subtly but unmistakably. News of the Arab billionaire's ethical actions spread quietly through social circles, boardrooms, and social media whispers, portraying him as a leader who understood that influence carries responsibility beyond profit and control. Farid had not merely saved Lila's job, he had made a public, living statement that wealth without moral courage is empty, and that true power is expressed by protecting dignity and rewarding integrity. Meanwhile, Lila noticed small changes in the café. Customers treated her with increased respect, colleagues approached her with encouragement, and even Vanessa, her manager, seemed quieter, reflective, and more measured in her tone. The café had become a microcosm of what justice looks like when combined with courage and ethical authority. That evening, Lila paused by the window as the sun dipped toward the horizon, streaking the sky with warm golds and reds. She thought of the rain, the elderly man she had helped, and the Arab billionaire whose intervention had turned fear into empowerment. In that moment, she understood that even the smallest acts, helping someone, showing compassion, standing firm in truth, could intersect with the right kind of power to change lives in ways unimaginable. Farid, miles away in his penthouse overlooking the city, considered the weight of responsibility his wealth and position carried. The lesson was clear: influence must be exercised with ethical courage, humility, and the awareness that the smallest moral acts, when recognized and supported, can create transformations far greater than money or authority alone. As night fell over Chicago, the golden remnants of sunlight reflecting in puddles and windows, both Billionaire and Waitress understood an unspoken truth. When compassion meets integrity and is recognized by ethical power, the world bends in favor of justice, dignity, and human morality. The morning sunlight streamed through the cafe windows, reflecting off polished tables and casting warm golden lines across the floor. Lila Thompson moved gracefully among the patrons, her confidence now palpable, each step carrying the quiet assurance that comes from having justice restored. Farid al-Mansouri, the Arab billionaire who had witnessed her act of courage in the rain and stepped in to save her job, arrived quietly once more, not to assert authority, but to observe the fruits of moral action unfolding naturally. The atmosphere in the cafe had changed completely. Whispers of respect replaced tension, and staff now treated Lila not just as a worker, but as someone whose integrity demanded admiration. Farid watched as she carefully balanced trays, smiled warmly at customers, and navigated the busy environment with composure, noting every subtle detail of her character: resilience, humility, and quiet strength that no amount of adversity could diminish. The manager, Vanessa, approached him tentatively, a trace of humility in her eyes. "I understand," she said, voice softer than before, "that I misjudged her." Farid nodded once, his gaze returning to Lila with quiet affirmation. "It is not enough to recognize the value of others only after harm has occurred," he said calmly. "Authority carries responsibility. Power must protect, not punish unjustly." Outside, sunlight glinted off the wet streets, casting a warm glow on passers-by, as though the city itself acknowledged that a lesson in morality had unfolded within these walls. Lila, sensing the quiet attention of someone who had the power to influence worlds, felt a profound gratitude but also a strengthened sense of purpose. She understood now that courage and kindness were not just virtues but tools of resilience, capable of inspiring justice and recognition even from those whose authority seemed absolute. Farid rose, leaving a subtle presence behind, a reminder that wealth and power are at their best when exercised to preserve dignity, reward integrity, and protect those who act with moral courage. The cafe returned to its rhythm, but its energy had shifted. The ripple effects of compassion, ethical leadership, and integrity would linger far beyond its walls. True power is measured not in wealth or titles, but in the courage to uphold dignity, recognize integrity, and protect the vulnerable. Acts of kindness, no matter how small, can ripple outward, influencing the world in ways unseen, and ethical authority is the rarest form of influence, one that transforms fear into respect, injustice into redemption, and ordinary moments into extraordinary lessons. When compassion meets integrity and is met with moral courage, even the smallest gesture can change a life forever.